We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders. A new world order.
Getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And the smartest thing to do is pull. And they made that decision to pull. And then we watched the building collapse.
A new world order. A new world order can emerge. A new world order. A new world order can emerge.
So what you need, have them all Larry Silverstein, who's Willie Seven. All I hear is so what you need, have them all Larry Silverstein, who's Willie Seven. All I hear is so what you need, have them all Larry Silverstein, who's Willie Seven. All I hear is so what you need, have them all Larry Silverstein, who's Willie Seven.
9/11. New world order. On. Fire back. 9/11. New world order. On. Fire back. Welcome.
There is a chance the President of the United States to use this disaster to carry out a new world order. America will become increasingly vulnerable to hostile attack on our homeland. Americans will likely die on American soil, possibly in large numbers.
A new world order. A new world order can emerge. A new world order. A new world order can emerge. A new era.
Americans will likely die on American soil, possibly in large numbers.
All these new challenges are bringing together about the biggest restructuring we have ever seen, not just of the global economy, but of the global order as a whole. And 200 years ago, a famous British Foreign Secretary said that the new world had been called into existence to redress the balance of the old. In 1990, another old world ended. dominated by the Cold War, and people talked then, in 1990, of a new world order. What they actually meant then was a new political order. And what was not foreseen then, but is obvious now from everything that we see and do, what we experience in every day of our life, is the sheer scale and speed and scope of globalization. And it's only now that we can begin to understand that the world order that globalization brings and what it's going to look like, it's driven forward now not just by the balance of military strength, the Cold War times, or ordinary political power. It's been driven forward by a seismic shift in economic power that we see around us. But what does the New World Order mean for countries like ours who are looking to succeed? I suggest that the countries that are going to succeed are those that combine flexibility, free trade, open markets, with proper stewardship of the environment and investment in education, infrastructure and innovation. And the question for us is how we meet and master all these challenges to ensure that Britain enhances its competitiveness in the process and realizes what I believe is our destiny of success in this new world order. So, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, a new world is emerging. It is a new world order with significantly different and radically new challenges for the future.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ian Crane.
Right, hopefully we've got some microphone here. New World Order, a phrase that hadn't crossed Gordon Brown's lips until January of this year. Hansard shows no record of Gordon Brown ever mentioning the phrase New World Order. He'd managed to avoid it all the way through Tony's premiership up until January, when he was in India, and he gave a very halting speech. It was almost like somebody had put a script in front of him and said, "You want to be Prime Minister? You've got to read this, boy." So he mentioned New World Order 2 or 3 times in that speech. Well, you know, Bill Hicks, the great American comedian, political commentator, back in '92, made this observation that he said, you know, I often think that every time a new American president is sworn in, they're taken down into the basement of the White House and they're shown the real film of what occurred at Dealey Plaza in 1963. And they let it sink in and they say, "Now, Mr. President, any questions?" Well, consider the possibility that Gordon was shown the film of what truly occurred in the Pont de l'Arma on August 31st, 1997, because that was the moment that Tony Blair sold his soul. That was the moment at which Tony Blair was totally in the clutches of those who seek to control pretty much everything they can lay their hands on. What I'm going to do this evening, in the next hour or so, is touch on a number of different threads, and it may appear that I'm jumping from one thread to another as I go through the evening. But as it comes to a conclusion, hopefully you'll see that all these threads come together. And I'm going to touch on some fairly controversial aspects. I only get nervous when I come to Glastonbury. Everywhere else, I'm giving presentations that, you know, I've generally given once or twice at least before. But Glastonbury, I always push the envelope that little bit further. And tonight is no different. So please bear with me. This is an X-rated evening, I think. But the New World Order, we can trace it back quite some way, but just look at this century. And Hitler made this observation. George Bush Sr. used the phrase on September the 11th, 1990, 6 weeks after Saddam had bitten the bait offered by April Glaspie when she basically told Saddam that America wouldn't get involved if Iraq invaded Kuwait. And the 11th of September has some interesting connotations through history, not least that on the 11th of September 1973, that was the date at which George Bush Sr. was actively involved in setting up the coup in Chile that took out President Allende and put in Pinochet, with Kissinger making his famous remark after the electorate had elected Allende in Chile. And Kissinger said, No, that we have to do something. This is far too important for the people to decide. So the New World Order, it has a number of connotations, but I'm going to move into the arena of the brotherhoods. And what does this phrase, New World Order, mean? Now, you may see some words come up which actually sort of, how shall I say, cause a reaction in you. Try and suppress that reaction, because I'm going to explain that the use of these words is somewhat different than perhaps it is presented in the media. And I will try and explain why it is that the media try and create an impression about these words so that effectively they become words of non-discussion. The New World Order in the secret brotherhoods is another term for the quest for a new Jerusalem. Now, New Jerusalem is a generic term within the brotherhoods that means a new start. Jerusalem obviously has featured through history as the start of a number of New World Orders. So over the years, there have been a number of cities that have been effectively designated by the brotherhoods operating within those cities and the leaders of those cities as the New Jerusalem. Not least Paris, Washington, Perth in Australia, and there's a couple of places dotted around the US. But one of the primary places is London. And if my memory serves me correctly, it was 2 or 3 years ago that Adrian Gilbert stood on this stage on a Sunday evening and talked about London and his investigation into London as the New Jerusalem. And this term came about in London basically from around about the 17th century, although we can trace this thread back a little further, with a group of people who believed that England was effectively ceded by one of the lost tribes of Israel, effectively the tribe of Ephraim. And the term they use to identify their New Jerusalem is Zion. Now, Zion, of course, is a hill, the name of a hill in Jerusalem. Now, the media have worked very, very effectively for the last 30 or 40 years to shut down any intellectual discussion that revolves around the word Zion. To the extent, there's two groups in North America, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, and AIPAC, the America-Israel Public Affairs Committee, that have actually been so successful in shutting down the intellectual debate, they actually managed to get the dictionary definition of the American International Dictionary. That's a bit of a contradiction of terms, I know, but they got the definition changed so that anti-Semitism was defined as criticism of Zionism. This is intellectually dishonest. Zionism is a religio-political organization, an extremist religio-political organization. I mean, it's basically like criticizing the BNP. I mean, we don't have any problem if we get involved in a debate criticizing the BNP. But if we get involved in a debate where we're criticizing the Zionists, we run the risk of being tagged as anti-Semitic. And nothing could be further from the truth. And I want to make it very, very clear right from the outset that nothing I say tonight is anti-Semitic, and everything that I say, I have checked and cross-checked with members of the British Jewish community. Back in February, The Guardian ran an article written by one of the leading members of the British Jewish community. And basically he was saying that they were getting fed up with being told what to think by the political extremists. And on the Guardian website, for 10 or 12 days, ran a whole really heated debate. Everybody pretty much participating in the debate was Jewish. And basically it was the British Jews saying, no, we've had enough. We are not going to put up with the fact that every time we criticize the policies and practices of the Israeli government, we are vilified as being anti-Semitic or a self-hating Jew. So I just want to make that very, very clear that when we mention Zionism and it has any link with Israel, we are talking about a religio-political organization, nothing more, nothing less. The goals of the New World Order. Now, the New World Order is not one organization. There are a number of different organizations, and they make very, very strange bedfellows. And as we go through the evening, I will introduce you to some of them, certainly not all of them by any stretch of the imagination. It's very incestuous. They cross-fertilize with each other. From time to time, they all think they're in the ascendancy. What's going to get very interesting is when they get to a certain place in their agenda, and then they turn on each other. But the New World Order is a generic term, actually, that represents a number of organizations who think, and we certainly would like to believe, that they're calling the shots. But one thing is for sure, these are the goals that they absolutely share. The one world government, the one world economy, the one world religion. And in each case, the one world is theirs. And a population reduced to 1 billion people. So it's 80% reduction. And I believe last year, because last year's Glastonbury Symposium took place just a few weeks after a conference at the University of Houston, where this issue was debated openly and was reported in widely in the American press. Now, I'm going to look a little bit at why it is that they get away with some of the crap they do. And, we seem to, en masse, just acquiesce to their activity. And this is a statement from Hermann Goering. And he said, naturally, the common people don't want war. But after all, it is the leaders of a country who determine the policy. And it is always a simple matter to drag people along, whether it is a democracy or a fascist dictatorship or a parliament or a communist dictatorship. Voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. This is easy. All you have to do is tell them they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in every country. Do I need to remind you, a certain world leader, shortly after 9/11, said, "You're either with us or you're with the terrorists." The US has effectively been a dictatorship since 2003. Very few Americans are aware of this. George Bush signed the orders for a state of emergency in 2003, and he hasn't rescinded those powers. He has recently submitted, literally within the last few weeks, he has recently submitted a bill to the Senate which will give the Department of Homeland Security the right to sequester the assets of anybody who criticizes the policy of the government. We are well on the road to the United Soviet States of America. Now, I've lived in the US. I lived in the US for much of the 90s. I lived and worked in Houston. The TV is unreal. It was so bad that I did not want my family to see the local TV stations because it was just full of all the violence that was allegedly occurring. And all the time I lived there, I never saw any of it, but it was on the news. So I got the satellite system, which cost quite a lot of money back then because it was fairly new. But the beauty of it was that the satellite stations were not allowed to show the news in the local area. That had to be the domain of the terrestrial stations. So when we were looking at the news on the satellite system, it was the news from Chicago or from LA. So when my wife said, "Oh my God, did you see what went down in LA today? Shootings here, shootings there." And I said, "Yeah, but that's LA, isn't it?" It would have been exactly the same, if not worse, if we'd had the local Houston stations. But I had to create that perception that there was a difference. And this is the way in which, obviously, the US is kept, the people of the US are kept in a state of fear. And of course, then the reality shows. The classic expectation in the US of the government is that the people get up, put on the TV, get their dose of morning bullshit, have their breakfast, go down to work at Walmart or McDonald's or KFC or whatever, do their 8 hours, go to a sports bar, go home, switch on the TV, get another dose of bullshit, and then go to bed. The whole idea is not to think, not to question. And it's moving towards a situation where if you do question it, you run the risk of having everything you've got confiscated. And the TV shows, look at what's going on in the UK right now. I mean, we're following hard on the footsteps of what's occurred in the US. Why? Because it was so successful in the US, so let's bring it over to the UK. I mean, the TV shows are absolutely mind-numbing. You know, and not that I make a habit of it, but I mean, you walk into a pub and I mean, you know, there's all this shit going on in the world, and what are people talking about? You know, what's going on in Corrie, or EastEnders, or Big Brother? I mean, the front line of the papers today, and two of them, the headline is about one of the soap stars caught taking coke. Kel surprise. This tool is absolutely destroying society. You know, people, I mean, we heard speakers through the weekend talking about people getting into the alpha state when they're watching the TV. You know, it's the stuff that's being pumped into the subconscious. You know, those who don't watch TV and those who don't read newspapers know a damn sight more than those who do. And the next stage in the game is to get people into debt. Now, this has been a strategy for the last 10 years. I'm not going to ask anybody to put their hands up if you fall into these categories, because tragically, many of you will. And this has been a sustained strategy since Tony Blair came to power, starting with the students. Up until 97, students basically could get a free education. This government will claim that more young people have had the opportunity to go to college and university in their tenure than any previous government. Technically, that's not exactly a lie, but that was never the objective. The objective was to get the kids to go to college, to get them into debt. The average debt for a student in this country today is £9,000. The average debt for a student that's completed their degree course is £15,000, which just goes to show how many people haven't actually completed their degree course. It's a staggering number. So, of course, once the student comes out of college, they got this psychological millstone of 15K plus around their neck. My daughter finished her degree course and she wanted to go traveling. And I said, well, that's great. I said, you know, go. She said, yeah, but what about my student debt? I said, don't worry, it'll still be there when you come back. And, of course, the credit card situation is unbelievable. You know, a little while ago, my wife dragged me along to, I think it's Blue Water, over around the M25. I mean, first of all, it's built in a quarry. It's like a black hole, you know. But we're walking around it, and I think it's built in a triangle. And I walked around and I suddenly realized I was sort of walking in the same spot I'd already walked in. And I just stopped. My wife was just walking in front of me and I just laughed. And she said, what are you laughing at? I said, do you realize there is nothing in this mall that anybody needs? Nothing. Yet the parking lot was absolutely packed. I said, you know, what's going on here? I said, you know, here we've got masses of people coming here to buy shit they don't need with money they don't have and to pay 30% interest for the privilege. With money that didn't even exist in the first place, but that's another story. And then, of course, we've got this artificial pumping up of house prices. I mean, if you're a house owner, you know, clearly you have done very well out of this. But the nature of the beast here was to get the young people, certainly in the age range of 20 through to mid-40s, to get them to buy bigger and bigger houses, get bigger and bigger mortgages, so that basically they have less and less disposable income and therefore less and less freedom. And with interest rates going even higher, they pump this into the news because what they want, this is actually probably the PR agencies of those companies offering fixed rate mortgages. It's like, you know, come and get the fixed rate mortgage now and avoid the higher interest rates. But, you know, we are heading for disaster here. Paulden touched on it already today. I'm not going to have the time to discuss it right now. I'm actually going to give a talk in Totnes in a couple of months on the myth of peak oil. Peak oil is a complete and utter myth. It's brilliant. It's so plausible, it's brilliant, that the vast majority of people who are aware of the term have bought into it. And the purpose is to subconsciously prepare you for the fact that you're going to be paying £1 a litre plus to fill up your car. Let me tell you that just 8 years ago, in 1999, the price of a barrel of oil was $9.81. Nothing has changed except the artificial pumping up of the price of a barrel of oil. Who's making the profit? Look at the profitability of all the oil companies in the last 5 years. Dick Cheney is made out like a bandit because of Halliburton stock pricing increasing by fivefold. But we're heading for the crash. It started in the US. Many people, if there's anybody here from the US, you'll already be aware of this. But it started in the US, and it will follow here. It will follow here. It will be a deliberate ploy to create a situation where people are sitting on negative equity, and so reducing the freedom even more. And of course, if this wasn't enough, the final nail in the coffin was to decimate pensions. 10 years ago, the average person who'd worked in the sort of corporate environment for 30 to 40 years could realistically look at retiring on a full pension in this country, which is 2/3 your final salary, a full pension probably in the early 60s. Today, to get that same deal, you've got to work until you're 72. So at every level, the strategy has been to remove the opportunity for you, the wider population, to probe at what's going on, to look any deeper than the surface information that you're getting through the media. A little bit of history, the New World Order, very important to the link today. Hitler was inducted into the Thule Society in 1919 by a guy called Dietrich Eckart. A great book to read here is a book written by Louis Pauls and Jacques Bergier in 1958. And these guys did some tremendous research into the role that Dietrich Eckart played in getting Hitler to effectively play the puppet role of leader of the National Socialist Party. They investigated and they dug up the records and private diaries of Dietrich Eckart taking Hitler into the Bavarian forest and going through the peyote ceremonies. Hitler was often on stage giving his oratory. He would come off stage, collapse in a heap at the bottom of the steps in a cold sweat, almost sort of shake as though he was coming round, and then say, "How was it?" Many scholars believe that Hitler was actually sort of possessed while he was going through that process. The SS, as part of the National Socialists under Himmler, had a group called the Ahnenerbe. Then the Ahnenerbe was that group within the SS that was responsible for esoteric research. The National Socialists were very, very conscious of the fact that there was some esoteric technology available. All they had to do was go find it, and of course use it for their own purposes. And they had a number of forays into Tibet. In fact, anybody see the film here, 7 Years in Tibet? Yeah. The character that Brad Pitt played was based on a true story of one of the Ahnenerbe who went to Tibet to do the research. The war broke out, and he ended up staying in Tibet for the duration, actually became a close confidant of the Dalai Lama. Now, the Ahnenerbe were very, very successful in their research, and such authors like Nick Cook, in his book, The Hunt for Zero Point, has done a lot of excellent investigative work into what technology the National Socialists were able to develop. And there's some excellent academics who are looking at this. One guy is Nicholas Goodrich Clark from Exeter University. He's a professor in the School of Western Esotericism there. But he's also a specialist on the occult research of the Ahnenerbe. There is much black technology that is around that we don't know about. I am going to propose to you that whilst I'm not in any way disputing that there are UFOs that do not originate on this planet, there are certainly UFOs, what we would regard as UFOs, that do. And this technology has probably been around for 50, 60 years. The reason Patton did not go hell for leather for Berlin at the end of the Second World War was because he was instructed to make a beeline for the Skoda factory that was just across the border in Czechoslovakia, because that was where a whole bunch of the German scientists were based who were working on a lot of the esoteric projects. And these scientists were smuggled back to America under an operation called Operation Paperclip. And top of that list was a guy called Wernher von Braun, who, of course, ultimately developed the rocket system that allegedly took man to the moon. Has anybody ever wondered why it is that all the moon landings occurred under the Nixon presidency, the most honest president in history? You recognize this symbol as the death head symbol of the SS, except this isn't the death head symbol of the SS. This is the death head symbol of Skull and Bones. Hitler's SS was known as the Brotherhood of Death. Skull and Bones is known as the Brotherhood of Death. And there is another group that we'll look at later that's also known as the Brotherhood of Death. Very, very strange bedfellows. Skull and Bones really came to the fore when George Bush became president, but more so, of course, when he was running against John Kerry, because they were both Skull and Bonesmen. And the media failed to probe this very strange coincidence. Only 15 people are inducted into Skull and Bones in Yale every year. It's estimated that there's something like about 500 and maybe 550 bonesmen alive. And yet these guys are very much at the top of the tree throughout the powerful organizations in the US. This is my chart of the hierarchy of the brotherhoods in the US. This is the way it works. This is how everybody is kept under control in the US. So, if you don't want to call it the United Soviet States of America, you can call it the United States of Freemasonry. Skull and Bones at the top. They fought long and hard for the ascendancy, and they're there. They have made sure that they have players at the senior level on the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. Now, Skull and Bones is unique to Yale, so that means there's a hell of a lot of other universities that obviously are not covered by Skull and Bones. And these guys are mopped up by Phi Beta Kappa, which is one of the oldest fraternities in the US. Phi Beta Kappa was established on December the 5th, 1776. It was established by a group of people who were pissed off that they weren't invited to participate in establishing the Declaration of Independence 6 months previously. So Phi Beta Kappa is effectively the subordinate organization that sort of takes care of anybody that wasn't at Yale. And Phi Beta Kappa players are in all of the senior leadership roles in the administration through the US. And then we have the Shriners. In the US, Freemasonry is far more open than it is here. In the UK, it's estimated that there's about 700,000 Freemasons, and nobody really knows for sure. But in the US, it is reported that there are over 10 million Freemasons. And they wear it on their belt buckle, or they wear a badge to say they're a 32nd degree Mason. And one of the things that I learned while I was working there is if you really wanted to get anything done, I mean, I wasn't a Mason, I'm not a Mason, never have been, never will be. But if I needed things done, I needed to have a Mason as my right-hand man. So once I actually realized the rules of the game, and I had a 32nd degree Mason as my sort of lieutenant, if you like, then we actually were able to sort of do what I'd gone over there to do. And at the lower level, the blue degrees, right, percolating, just the same as here, the police, business leaders, civil servants. And if you piss anybody off, God help you, because these guys can call all the shots and they can run you out of business. The order out of chaos. They're very, very successful at creating the chaos. And of course, they've been pretty successful so far at offering the solution. But we're starting to see through them. Now, after the Second World War, Eisenhower, in his final speech before handing over the presidency, made the observation that the US needed to beware the power of the industrial military complex. He knew, he'd seen it firsthand, the power that had come to the industrial complex because of the need for armaments in particular during the war effort. He knew that these guys were potentially loose cannons. But the coup d'etat was at Dealey Plaza. Ostensibly, America has not been under the control of the president in any way, shape, or form since that day in 1963. I'm not suggesting that the leaders of the UK have any more power. I mean, these guys are the front men. These are the media players. They're not calling the shots. This will be the third year that I've stood on this platform and mentioned this document, the Project for a New American Century, Rebuilding America's Defenses. The document that was published in 2000, September of 2000, 1 year before the Bush election. Sorry, a few months before Bush was elected, because he was appointed in January of 91. But this is the blueprint. This is absolutely the blueprint for everything that has occurred since Bush became the occupier of the White House. There should be no surprises. And of course, the famous phrase on page 51 is that, America really is going to struggle to get the popular support for these ambitious global objectives unless there is some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. And these are the guys. What a bunch. What a bunch of guys. Paul Wolfowitz, of course, he went from being Assistant Secretary of Defense to head of the World Bank, but he couldn't resist dipping his pen in the company ink, and, of course, had to resign a little while ago because he was effectively guilty of nepotism. This is Scooter Lewis Libby, who was recently found guilty of releasing the name of Valerie Plame, which was an act of retribution for her husband, Joe Wilson, for not actually towing the White House line over the Niger Yellowcake issue. And, of course, he was sentenced to jail. He was sentenced to 2.5 years in jail. But the moment that he was sentenced to jail, George Bush overruled the sentence. Immediately, this is a classic indication of the fact that America is under a dictatorship. The president can immediately overrule the legal system. And Dov Zakheim, of course, here, Rabbi Dov Zakheim, he's the guy who on September the 10th, 2001, announced to the media that the Pentagon could not account for $2.3 trillion. Small change. The symbolism. We see symbolism of the brotherhoods in Paris, very much. We see it in London in a big way. And, of course, we see it in Washington. And we see here the seal of the US on the back of the dollar bill. Here we see Bush waving the dollar bill. And here we see the word Mason, here, M-A-S-O-N, within the inverted pentagram. Here we see the pentagram in the streets of Washington. Here we see Moloch. And here we see Moloch, often represented either as an owl or as the bull. But here we see Moloch here. Now, Andy Thomas talked about Moloch in his presentation this morning, and how Moloch is a statue at Bohemian Grove where the leading politicians and leading members of the industrial military complex go to act out this ritual, the cremation of care ritual. Now, when Moloch in the Middle East was worshipped as a god, this was a metal statue that was heated up, and the baby was put in the hot arms of the statue here. Obviously, the baby died a very painful death. But in the occult realm, the more painful the death, the more power you get from it. And this is a picture, and this is one of the pictures taken by Alex Jones and John Ronson when they infiltrated Bohemian Grove a few years ago. And of course, as Andy said, this is just a ritual because they don't sacrifice children anymore. Really? We just do it differently. Why do you think Tony Blair has never yet sanctified the name of any fallen British soldier in Parliament? Because to do so would acknowledge the tragedy of that death. But this is just sacrifice. And it will continue until such time as, they really run out of troops. which, by the way, slight aside, is why there are big moves in the US to unite Canada, the US and Mexico and establish the North American Union. One, because the dollar's tanking and going in the toilet. Great opportunity to wipe out the $10 trillion American debt, because if the dollar's worth nothing, 10 trillion nothings is not a great deal. So great way to wipe out the debt. But, and they'll introduce the Amero. The Amero. But there's a much deeper objective than just that. The objective is to bring Mexico into the Union so that the US military can bring the Mexicans into the US Army. And of course, what will happen is, with the US, like the UK, with a falling birth rate, then the Mexican, with a rising birth rate, being a staunchly Catholic country, they will have another ready resource. I mean, Britain's done it before with the Gurkhas and with the Fijians. On a smaller scale, here is the opportunity for the US to tap into potentially an unlimited source of cannon fodder. 9/11. Wonderful theatre, absolutely wonderful theatre. But it still fooled the vast majority of the world. All we can ask, those people who have been part of the 9/11 Truth Movement for a number of years and those people who can continue to come into the 9/11 Truth Movement, all we can do is try to continue to point out that the physical evidence that is in the public domain does not in any way, shape or form support the official version of events. And to get people to take a look at it for themselves and come to their own conclusion. But it was the unique opportunity, obviously, for PNAC, the Project for New American Century, to launch their objective of attacking Afghanistan and Iraq. And of course, we know that these plans were drawn up a long time before 9/11. Now, on 9/11, the world was dealt a particular tarot card, the Tower Tarot card. The 16th card in the major arcana. Look at the similarities between the Tower Tarot card and what actually occurred that day. The crown being blown off here, the top of the tower being blown, toppling, and then into dust. We have the falling man falling here. We have the blast of fire here. And even the foundations here looking very similar to what is at the bottom. Very significant. By chance? Or does somebody know what they're doing? What does the Tower Tarot card mean? If somebody draws the Tower Tarot card, it indicates that they're about to go through a very, very dramatic change in their life experience. It's the sort of card that somebody will draw, when they're about to go through a sort of major upheaval in their marriage or their work environment, or perhaps about to go through the proverbial midlife crisis, which of course is the midlife opportunity in reality, but still demonized as the midlife crisis. So it's a dramatic change, calling for a change to your way of life, to your belief system, to your whole worldview, to actually start to take an objective look at all the bullshit that you've been taught previously. It introduces the process of metanoia, which is actually a subject I talked about here 4 years ago. Metanoia. Metanoia is the Greek word that was mistranslated in the King James Version of the Bible, and it was translated to repentance. Metanoia does not mean repentance at all. It means changing your way of life, changing your worldview. In July of 2005, the 6th of July, London was awarded the Olympics. The day before a very significant event. Now, don't have the time to go into the detail here. Suffice to say that 2 years ago, when I talked about the 9/11-7/7 connection, I was looking at the similarities and trying to illustrate how a template had been used for both events. They weren't even smart enough to draw up a new template. And of course, they get arrogant, and they're getting more arrogant. This on the side of the bus, outright terror, bold and brilliant. I mean, this is the guy saying, you know what, we know there's some of you out there who know what we're doing. You know, it might be a few hundred, few thousand, few tens of thousands, might even be a few hundreds of thousands, but it's not enough. We can do this stuff with absolute impunity, and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, I'm here to tell you that we can. A lot of people have suggested that the 7/7 was London's 9/11. They're more right than they know. Because if we look at the Tower Tarot card, it is the 16th card in the major arcana. And if we look at the numerology of that, 1 and 6 is 7. 7/7, it was indeed London's Twin Towers, London's 9/11. This is the occult hand at play here. Probably one of the most graphic crop circles that appeared just 3 days after the events of 7/7. And of course, perhaps there was an indication here as to who might have been behind it. And when this occurred in 2005, we wondered what these scattered circles here were. But of course, a year later, exactly 1 year later, the Israeli government was dropping cluster bombs on Lebanon. So, was this perhaps advance warning of what was to come? Perhaps an indication of a Mossad role in the events of 7/7 and an Israeli government tactic to be used in Lebanon a year later. The Zionists of Israel looking for their new Jerusalem, and I'm not talking about the Jewish people here because not all Zionists are Jewish, but this is the Zionist flag. Of course, it is also the flag of the State of Israel. It is one of only 2 flags in the world that clearly states the territorial objectives of the political regime. And by the way, have you ever wondered why these are the same basic colors? Yeah? This is Zionism. This is the Penguin English Dictionary definition of Zionism, a political and military movement which established the independent state of Israel. The flag with the 2 blue bars was to state that the desire was to establish the greater Israel, i.e. between the 2 rivers of the Nile and the Euphrates. Funnily enough, there's a few other countries that have something to say about that. Just a quick reference here to the Balfour Treaty, because one of the major points of the Balfour Treaty is only 117 words, and this was, of course, Britain's commitment to do everything it could to help the international Zionists establish Israel as a Jewish homeland. But part of it said, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. Well, somehow they don't seem to have honored that part of the obligation. This is the West Bank. This is now the ghettos, the concentration camps that have been established by the Israeli government to keep the Palestinians there under control. Isn't it ironic that the Israeli government should be building these mass concentration camps? And of course, they're keeping the Palestinians from any access to fresh water. And as Paulden was saying, I share his opinion that the vast majority of people in the Middle East do not want this conflict to continue. I do believe that the vast majority of Arab peoples in the Middle East are quite ready to accept that there will be a permanent Jewish homeland in the Middle East. What they're not prepared to accept is the behavior of the Israeli government. And this is absurd. It's also obscene. And by the way, this is just a touch of this. I don't really have time to develop. Who got involved in the Fire the Grid exercise on July the 17th? Do you know which grid you were firing? You were firing the grid. This was a PSYOP. It was a PSYOP. It was organized by Stanford Research Institute. You were firing the grid on the United Nations flag here, the grid of oppression. Who is Shelley Yates? What Stanford Research were doing under the guise of the US military was establishing the gullibility of the alternative community. Shelley Yates, who's heard of Shelley Yates? I mean, if it had been somebody like Lynn McTaggart or William Bloom or James Twyman calling for it, at least there would have been a pedigree. But look at Shelley Yates' website. no references to any documentation supporting her claims of what occurred. Now, ironically, and perhaps suspiciously, once the investigation actually took hold, 2 documents appeared on very, very obscure websites, which nobody can trace before 2 weeks ago. So my point here is, when there is a call, the onus is on discretion and discernment to decide whether or not you participate, and if you participate, how you participate. Okay, I'm going to flick through quickly here. Jean-Charles Menzies, I was actually standing up here 2 years ago giving my talk, the 9/11 7/7 Connection, at exactly the same time this poor soul was being assassinated by Mossad-trained, armed British police using weapons and bullets that are illegal under the Geneva Convention. Dum-dum bullets. He was shot 11 times. There were 7 bullets in his head, 3 in his shoulder, and 1 missed. Well, dum-dum bullets do a hell of a lot of damage. DAC Paddock announced that it is not the Met Police's policy to shoot to kill. It is purely the Met Police policy to shoot to incapacitate. I sent DAC Paddock an email asking him at what point they thought that Jean-Charles Menzies was incapacitated. I'm waiting on a reply. Okay. The robo-warrior. We are moving very quickly to a situation where we will no longer recognize the police. Recently in this country, the regiments have been decommissioned of the infantry. We used to have regiments, representing the counties, which dates back way to the First World War. Those regiments have all been decommissioned, and what we now have is the rifles. And this is the first step of the next piece of gradualism, to introduce an armed force that is EU-wide, so that in the event of unrest, civil unrest, on the streets of any European country, the troops that are sent to deal with it are not speaking the same language as the people they're dealing with, so that there is no possibility of establishing any kind of rapport. But for those of us that live in Devon, we're apparently okay, because immediately underneath that article it says, heaven is in Devon for the great escapists. So if you want to get away from this crap, maybe Devon's a place to start. The Star Wars project, what's coming next here? We've seen 9/11 being used as an excuse to pursue an agenda to establish effectively a military dictatorship in the US under the guise of the White House. But back in 1988, Reagan made this speech to the UN.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
He made that speech a number of times through the late 80s. And of course, it was Reagan who initiated the Star Wars project. But this from the paper just a few weeks ago, Space, America's New War Zone. Well, funnily enough, they talk all about that in here. And they talk about the need for America to dominate space and cyberspace. So they're ramping up the need to weaponize space. And here we have Blair challenges Putin. I have to be careful how I say that, because in French that's colloquial for whore. So Blair challenges Putin as missile storms escalate. Well, I'm sure Putin is quaking in his boots. But what it's doing is it's starting to demonize the cold Russians again. And why do we need to demonize the Russians? Well, funnily enough, they've just paid back the last installment to the World Bank of the money that they borrowed after the collapse of the Soviet Empire in 1990. So they've achieved financial independence. So all of a sudden, we need to demonize them. I contend to you that the New World Order, or players within the New World Order, are about to initialize a catastrophic and catalyzing event like a false flag alien invasion. They need something mega to get back on track for their agenda. They failed in Iraq. They're not going to be able to go into Iran, so they need to get control. How are they going to pull a stunt like this? They've got bases in 130 countries, military bases in 130 countries. They've got the black technology to be able to pull a stunt like this. It is audacious to the extreme. And of course, it's absurd. It's completely absurd. But so would it be for anybody standing up on a platform a few days, weeks, months, or years before the events of 9/11, claiming that the American government would launch an event where they flew their own planes into the World Trade Center. Now, there are other players who also want to get in on this act. And this is where I bring in something we talked about earlier. You remember this, £400,000 spent on something that my 5-year-old son could have done for about a fraction of the price. But there is way more to this than meets the eye. Seb Coe said that despite the objections to this logo, we will stay with it because it represents a goal that we believe in. This is the British Israelis, those who believe that the UK is the lost tribe of Ephraim and that the New Jerusalem, the New World Order, will be established. And my conjecture is that I'm not sure which will come first, or maybe they'll come together, but there will be an event at the London Olympics. They're starting with a blank sheet of paper. You know, they've got the opportunity to build in whatever pyrotechnics or whatever it is that they need to create a massive, massive event. And it'll be broadcast, of course, on worldwide television, millions watching. And bottom line is, they fooled us once. And George Bush himself says, you fool me once, you can't fool me again. This time, when they pull a stunt like this, the automatic reaction should be, hang on a goddamn second. Okay, I'm going to bring this very quickly to a close now. The Tower Tarot card, there's part of this card that's very, very significant, but it's hidden at the bottom. It's here. Because whenever we get trauma, it's also an opportunity. And the Tower Tarot card identifies the fact that when we've been through that trauma, we will have the opportunity to awaken the Kundalini. And we will have that opportunity to completely revisit our worldview. Now, our role as those who are perhaps more aware than the majority of people who are caught up in the debt trap or the workaholic trap, as Philip Day said, the work home, work home, work home, as Stuart Wilde calls it, the tick-tock, the control of tick-tock. Those of us that have perhaps had an opportunity to see through the veil, that veil is disappearing fast. And our role is going to be to help those people as they poke their head through the veil, or the veil disintegrates in front of them. And instead of going into shock, but to guide them through it. And I want to finish by just re-quoting a story that Greg Braden re-quoted in, I think it was the Isaiah Effect. And he said that, you know, for those people who are, if you like, in the advance party of this awakening process, we have a responsibility. And the illustration that he used, he said he was at a Special Olympics. And the Special Olympics, there was a 50-meter running race. And all the people lined up to participate in this event were handicapped in one way, shape, or form. And the starting gun went off, and they all started to move along the track as best they could. And one of the competitors, who was towards the back, fell and tripped. And the person who was nearest to them stopped. And then the next person stopped, until the person who was leading the race also stopped. And they all turned round, and they all went back, and they all bent down to pick up the person who had fallen. And they carried that person, and they all walked as one to the finish line. Ladies and gentlemen, that is our goal. To work as one, regardless of where anybody's at in this journey, to help them along that track, and to ensure that we all cross the finish line together. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Ian Crane, thank you very much.
Our world, all the other worlds, all the planets, all the universes, parallel universes, whatever there may be, every blade of grass, every animal is interconnected in some way, shape or form.
Some say the end of mankind is near. Some say that economic and financial turmoil is part of the process, along with global warming, warfare, and the spread of mass psychosis.
When there's no place you feel at home, and you think you'll be better off alone.
Children are prescribed drugs to keep them calm. The climate is changing all around us, while celebrities become our gods and materialism the new mantra.
We live in an era where we're obsessed by celebrity. We live in an era where everyone wants a route out of their ordinary lives, and people want a quick fix these days. I mean, the idea of learning a trade from your father or doing a 5-year apprenticeship's gone out of the window. People now want to go on Big Brother and become a celebrity overnight. People want to be a wag.
Is there a reason behind this modern day madness? Are our material lives making us truly content?
If I want to know what the truth is, I have to live truthfully. And as long as I live as truthful to myself and to others, then I'm like in the vibration of truth. Therefore, it will resonate with me or not.
But there is a ratio to it all, a rhyme and reason behind everything that we do and everything that affects us.
Did this really happen by accident? Did this whole universe and us living on this planet in this fragile atmosphere, in this one place in the universe? It is beyond thought, it is beyond words, but there is a purpose to it.
Once people start connecting with what they think and what they believe, once they start taking the more innocent point of view that their ancestors took, I think there is still hope for the survival of the human race. Because if they don't, we will poison ourselves off this planet eventually, I think.
Like mad magicians seeking to rule the world, men of renown have fleetingly seen the epic nature of the ancient code and its alluring essence, but all too often they fall into an abyss of their own making, choosing the wrong side of the code. But today we too have missed the point in our everyday complacency. We choose to exist in a waking sleep. We spend time naming things and separating them, classifying endless parts and pieces without remembering the whole, the one from which all things come. It needs no hatred nor warfare. It needs no drugs. It simply is. For you are the key to the code.
Once you've found that point of connection in yourself, where you are part of nature, part of the world around you, and it is part of you, then no secret, no quantum physics, quantum spirituality can get anywhere near that point of unique connection, because you've found yourself and you've found your own God within yourself.
Rosslyn Chapel was built upon an area that was a noted place of healing from the word go. I can tell you that when I first went there in the early 1990s, that the impression that I had when I walked through the door was of immense latent power. It's a nexus of earth energy, and as I have found out through hard experimentation, there is an operable portal between this world and the next inside that chapel. It wasn't just another building, it was a powerhouse of spirit, it was a powerful place. And I think the chapel was built in such proportions that it would take and harmonise that energy. I think it would amplify. It was acting almost as an amplifier, a stone-built amplifier. The chapel is actually moving in time, not in this time, but 0.1% in another time. I was asked, would I like to experience this energy? I literally came off the floor. It wasn't feet off the floor, maybe half an inch. I actually lifted from the floor, fell forward. I was absolutely amazed, I was completely astounded. I hadn't a clue what had happened. So you could see the faces on the other side. They wanted to be brought through to this side of reality. The purpose of the augmented fourth was to induce a feeling of uneasiness or instability in the listener, and, if you like, introduce the devil into music. That the augmented fourth was inducing some of them to experience altered states of consciousness. Why would Sir William go to all the trouble of introducing this devil's chord?
Along the wilderness road they come. Behind them, the struggles of the Revolutionary War. Before them, the conquest of a wilderness. The journey is long and arduous, but it leads to a land of promise. Day after day, the party follows the unfamiliar trail.
Bigfoot, also known in North America as the Sasquatch or the Oma. Was the Sasquatch here before the Indians? Thousands of Indian locations are named after the boss of the mountain, or the wild man, as the Bigfoot was originally called by the Amerindians. Indian cultures generally regard the wild man with the greatest respect. He is viewed as a special kind of being, perhaps because of his seemingly close relationship to humans. Many Indian elders regard him as standing on the border between animal and human consciousness, giving him a supernatural kind of power. But as special as he may be, there is no tribe that suggests that he is anything other than a physical being, living in the same physical dimensions as humans and other animals. He eats, he sleeps, gathers, and communicates with family members. It seems that the wild man may indeed be of a varied and widespread clan, encompassing every continent of the world. They all have one very distinct trait in common: an exceptionally big human-like foot. search for this film brings us to the great state of Kentucky, the bluegrass state, and the home of the Kentucky Derby. Throughout the last 100 years, there have been many wild man sightings in Kentucky.
There's something in there. There's something right in there. In there. Listen. Hear it? Yeah. There's something moving in this tree line along the edge. It looks like they're hearing it over there. They're down.
Brighter, Philip? The
Yes.
light from the road, the blue light. That's getting brighter and brighter and brighter.
Dude, look through here. Look through there right now. Look through there. What is it?
You can't see it, but the camera picks it up.
Holy shit. Let me see.
Look at that.
Look at that. What is that?
I don't know.
Oh,
Here, back up so
Look
you
at
can see it.
Whoa.
I'm gonna walk over there. Can you zoom in on it? Let's go up there. Come on.
hold on. It's something. It is something low. Low spread. Oh, we can't see it, but the camera can see it.
Let's move in. Come on.
Hold on. Don't take your camera off of it. I'm not. Just stay there. Let him go. Don't lose it.
Well, here I am, it's the middle of the night, setting off to go to Norway to meet a very unusual Viking man who's made an incredible discovery.
This is really quite exciting. I mean, they produced, let's say, a talisman on a very, very grand scale. I mean, it's so huge that it's quite unbelievable. You have to have the knowledge, and you have to have, of course, the golden mean, because this is the key to the whole thing, really. And without it, you would never find it. But when you know that that is the key, you can unlock it and you can find the design. And that city is now called Trondheim, but it's only been called that for the last few hundred years. Its original name is Nidaros. Nidar, serpent in Celtic, and Ros, old knowledge. So actually, the city was called Old Serpent Knowledge.
That is fascinating. What Harold's discovered is remarkable. It's massive. It's as big as the Great Wall of China or the Great Pyramids of Egypt. But it's something that had to be hidden. He discovered a circle on the ground that measured 666. He discovered a pentagram upside down. And he discovered the serpent. 3 images that we are told and have been told for an awful long time are symbols of evil. But this isn't the truth. The truth is that these are symbols of wisdom, symbols of greater knowledge. And that's what I leave Norway with.
From the infamous Illuminati to the modern Freemasons, the world is fascinated with secret societies. Tales of child sacrifice, world domination, and dark dealings with extraterrestrials are all paraded before us as truth. The New World Order, famously penned by the science fiction writer H.G. Wells, has become a reality in the minds of millions, and today its leaders are even believed by some to be reptilian shapeshifters. The massive amounts of information set before us now on the World Wide Web may be spreading further and faster than ever before. But the belief in a powerful and secret ruling elite is nothing new. In fact, secret societies have been around almost as long as man. The eventual knowledge of these groups would be deemed sacred and protected. Whether it was practical methods of survival, navigation, measurement, or psychological and spiritual inner wisdom, it would become the ground plan for future secret societies, and as populations grew, it would bestow great power and danger upon them. It all began in the knowledge of the heavens and the mind of man. It all revolved around strength. And so our question has to be today, what is the true purpose of the modern elite within the Brotherhood? Is it truly one of charitable works? Yes. Does it still maintain ideas about reaching the divine in balance and wisdom? Yes. Is it an organisation seeking influence and power? Yes. Has it been involved with revolution and scandal? Yes. This is the story of the groups who have guarded this sacred knowledge for centuries.